With exactly 3 weeks until the start of free agency, can the Dallas Mavericks find themselves getting a secondary playmaker to help out Luka Doncic going into this upcoming season? This is the Gray Area right here on Kevin Gray Sports. My name is Kevin Gray. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Kevin Gray Sports. Be sure to hit that subscribe button right there for all things Kevin Gray Sports here on YouTube. You can find me on your home of the Dallas Cowboys and Texas Rangers, 105.3 The Fan. The Dallas Mavericks find themselves 3 weeks away from the start of free agency as they get ready to introduce Nico Harrison as the head of basketball operations and Jason Kidd as the 10th head coach in franchise history, and embark on an important summer that will need to see this team try to improve by not only creating the next necessary cap space to be able to go after said free agents, but more importantly, give this fan base an idea that things are going to be changing now that Nico Harrison and Jason Kidd have taken over, and if they can attract the kind of individual free agents that want to come and play with Luka Doncic and this Mavericks basketball team. Obviously, for Nico Harrison, it's going to be extremely important to be the kind of closer that the Mavericks think he can be, given the deep relationships and connections that he has across the NBA. But who are some of the free agency targets that we're potentially talking about here that the Mavericks could find themselves potentially going after realistically, given where they are in terms of their cap space and what that could look like if certain players decide to opt in, hello Josh Richardson, or if the Mavericks decide to keep a guy in Tim Hardaway Jr., whom we've already heard from Tim Hardaway Sr., that he would love to see his son remain as a Dallas Maverick. There have been rumors and overtures about Tim Hardaway Jr. potentially wanting to go home to play with the Miami Heat, and obviously that would be an attractive place to go with a well-coached team, with a guy in Eric Spoelstra, guys there like Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler. But also, Tim Hardaway Jr. has become an integral part of this Mavericks basketball team with his catch-and-shoot ability from the three-point line, and also his growth by playing alongside Luka Doncic. He has put himself in position after completing his 4-year, nearly $72 million contract to be in line to command between $19 to $20 million per season. That could obviously take up a significant amount of space for the Dallas Mavericks, who could clear as much as near $30 million, potentially $35 million, depending on what happens if they decide to retain or if they decide to move on from Tim Hardaway Jr. And let's say Josh Richardson does opt into that near $12 million player option this upcoming summer. Could you potentially move on from him in a trade? We've also heard rumors now that a guy in Spencer Dinwiddie at 28 years of age, who has injured both of his ACLs, has decided to opt out of his $12.3 million option going into next season for the Brooklyn Nets. He is now available on the free agency market, a guy who at one point averaged 20 points and also 6.8 assists per game and was a terrific playmaker and facilitator for the Brooklyn Nets. He could be a guy that's available. We've heard reports from Christian Winfield of the New York Daily News that the Mavericks could find themselves interested in a guy in Spencer Dinwiddie, and that goes to the idea of secondary ball handlers and playmakers being alongside Luka Doncic, because all the load that Luka Doncic carried this past season was way too much, even for a guy that was named to his second consecutive first-team All-NBA selection at just 22 years of age. At some point, you've got to lessen the load on Luka Doncic and finding yourself getting a playmaker that not only can facilitate, but can go get his own bucket also, because one of the major problems that this Mavericks team has had, especially with Luka Doncic over the last few years, is that they really have not had a guy secondarily to Doncic who can really go get his own bucket, especially when you think about the last couple of years and primarily more so this year. Everyone else's offense is pretty much facilitated off of Luka Doncic's ability to create and facilitate that offense for guys like Kristaps Porzingis, the aforementioned Tim Hardaway Jr., and others who need to have the kind of facilitation from Luka Doncic to make things happen on the offensive end. Also, for a guy in Spencer Dinwiddie at 28 years of age who has said he wants potentially $125 million over 5 years from the Brooklyn Nets, you can find yourself potentially trying to get yourself a guy in Dinwiddie to pair alongside Luka Doncic. Could he be a player that gets you over the top? And that gets me to a guy like Kyle Lowry. Now, Kyle Lowry is going to be 35 years old going into this upcoming season, but the Toronto Raptors are in a very interesting spot when it comes to their franchise. They have the number 4 overall pick, and they could be in a situation, if you see or think for Kyle Lowry, that contract could be too much for you if you're the Raptors, to justify bringing him back, knowing the kind of youth movement that you may want to start to go down with young guys like Fred VanVleet, Pascal Siakam, OJ Anunoby, and others. You may decide, if you're the Toronto Raptors, that you want to move on from a Kyle Lowry. That also gets you to the Dallas Mavericks, who could use a veteran point guard who's had a ton of experience in this league as an NBA champion. Defensively, not going to take your toughest assignments night in and night out, but still good enough defensively to be capable alongside Luka Doncic. And again, another secondary playmaker that can handle the basketball and take some of those responsibilities away from Luka Doncic to give him the kind of ball player and handler that can definitely fit alongside Luka Doncic in this basketball team. So when you think about Kyle Lowry, when you think about Spencer Dinwiddie, when you think about other restricted free agents like Alonzo Ball, who could command $100 million this summer, could he be a potential fit for the Dallas Mavericks? Maybe. He's a better three-point shooter than what he was at the beginning of his career. Obviously, he's shown a propensity on the defensive end to be able to fit. But if you're the Dallas Mavericks, do you want to throw $25 to $27 million a season at Alonzo Ball to potentially bring him in alongside Luka Doncic? Also, that's a question that obviously the Mavericks, Nico Harrison and Jason Kidd and this brass are going to have to answer. Yes, I know there's the Rashawn Holmes of the world from the Sacramento Kings, the John Collinses of the world who are out there. I don't think John Collins necessarily leaves Atlanta, given the playoff run that he's had, and now that he's smoothed things over with your man Trae Young down there in Atlanta. I can see how the Hawks are able to work things out, especially now knowing that Nate McMillan is in the fold permanently as their head coach and what he's been able to do to transform that Hawks basketball team. So John Collins doesn't necessarily fit for me when it comes to whether or not the Mavericks can potentially get him, because any offer that he gets, John Collins does in free agency, the Hawks will most likely match in order to try and keep him. So obviously there are several options out there. You say, Kevin, what about a Mike Conley who could potentially be moving on from the Utah Jazz? I would be shocked if the Utah Jazz did not find a way to retain Mike Conley, given the fact that he was a first-time All-Star this year, the run that they were able to make in the playoffs, and how important he is to what they do from an offensive standpoint with his playmaking ability and facilitation alongside a guy in Donovan Mitchell. I don't see necessarily Mike Conley getting away from the Utah Jazz. So when you start thinking about what the Mavericks need to try and do this summer, these options are going to be hinged directly upon whether or not they decide to retain Tim Hardaway Jr. If you're in a position, if the Mavericks are, to do so by moving on for Tim Hardaway, now the possibilities start to get opened up a little bit more. And no, I'm not talking about Kawhi Leonard. That ain't a thing. That's not going to happen. Chris Paul, most likely, I think will stay with the Phoenix Suns, especially if they find themselves winning an NBA championship here in the very near future. So for the Mavericks, they've got themselves in a very interesting spot here. They aren't in the position necessarily to try and build through the draft. They don't have the necessary kinds of assets to make the kinds of major trades where you could try and go after guys like Bradley Beal or others via trade, unless you use definite future first-round selections and draft swaps to try and get a package together that surrounds a guy like Kristaps Porzingis and Jalen Brunson to try and go get a Bradley Beal. This Mavericks team is in a very interesting spot. You really can't build to the draft because you don't have the necessary draft picks to be able to do so. You don't even have a pick in this year's NBA draft unless something changes between now and the NBA draft. When you look at your free agency situation, you're trying to bank on a strategy that you've been going after for the last 10 years. Yes, you're doubling down on it with guys that have more connected relationships in the NBA in terms of its players, with guys like Nico Harrison and Jason Kidd, but can you actually execute on that strategy going forward? And who is Mark Cuban ultimately going to listen to when it comes to getting free agents for this basketball team? Remember that one time he tried to listen to your man Chandler Parsons when it came to DeAndre Jordan and Wesley Matthews. Yeah, you know how that went down for the Dallas Mavericks. But nonetheless, whether it's a Spencer Dinwiddie, a Kyle Lowry at 35 years of age, whomever you want to try and pencil in for this Mavericks team, they're going to have to rely on Nico Harrison and Jason Kidd to be ultimately the closers to be able to secure deals, to execute on a strategy that has really failed them over the last 10 years, and that is trying to bring in the kinds of free agents that can help this Mavericks team sustain the kind of success that they believe that they should have as a quote-unquote championship organization. Only time will tell if the Mavericks are able to execute on said strategy, given whom they've brought in as their new head coach and their general manager in Jason Kidd and Nico Harrison. But those are some of the options that you could potentially see more realistically for the Dallas Mavericks if they decide to go down that road, depending on what they do with guys like Tim Hardaway Jr., Josh Richardson, and others. We'll see how this NBA free agency period goes for a team that needs to get your man Luka Doncic some help going into 2021. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Kevin Gray Sports. Be sure to hit that subscribe button right there for all things Kevin Gray Sports here on YouTube. It's been another episode of The Gray Area. We'll talk to you later. Peace.